I swear, Martha, if that mutt digs one more hole in my garden, I'm sending him to the shelter myself. Samia's voice rang through the thin walls of the house, hot with frustration and loud enough to rattle the picture frames. Martha didn't flinch. She was used to his temper by now, sharp, tired, and always louder when grief sat too close. Her fingers paused over the kitchen sink, still wet from the rinsed dishes, and she exhaled slowly, letting the ache in her chest bloom in silence. Outside, the sky had shifted from gold to ash, and thunder rumbled somewhere far off, distant but promising. Maybe he's looking for something, she said flatly, not turning. Or someone. Samir muttered something under his breath and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The house fell quiet again, except for the sound of rain starting to tap against the window panes, gentle and rhythmic, like breath against skin. Martha wiped her hands and walked slowly to the back door, where she knew Buzo, her golden retriever, would be waiting. He'd been acting strange for weeks now, disappearing into the woods behind the house for hours at a time, returning dirty, tired, and sometimes trembling. Samir said the dog was going senile. Martha thought otherwise. Animals felt what people couldn't admit. She unlocked the door and pulled it open, and there he stood, Buzo, soaked and panting, his golden coat darkened with mud and rain, and clutched gently in his mouth was a tiny, trembling kitten. Martha froze. The kitten wasn't just wet, it was crying loud, broken mews that tore through the storm with more pain than sound. Its body was so small it looked like it shouldn't have survived the walk, let alone the storm. Buzo stepped forward carefully, eyes wide and unsure, as if offering something sacred. He placed the kitten at Martha's feet and sat down, head low, tail still. Martha's heart shattered in a quiet, controlled way. Not like glass but like old wood, cracking, soft, inevitable. She crouched and scooped the kitten into her hands. It was cold, ribs too sharp under thin fur, eyes half glued from infection. A baby no one had wanted. A voice the world had ignored. Samir appeared behind her in the doorway, eyes narrowed. Seriously, that stray's been sneaking into our trash for a week. Let it go. Martha didn't move. He didn't find it in the trash. He's been looking for her. Looking for what? For something that still needs him. She walked past him without another word, cradling the kitten to her chest. Buzo followed silently, his steps slow, heavy with purpose. Samir didn't argue. Not this time. In the living room, Martha placed the kitten on a towel and began cleaning her gently with a soft cloth, each stroke deliberate and kind. Buzo lay beside them, watching every movement, his breathing slow and steady. The kitten stopped crying after a while. It curled against the towel, eyes fluttering shut. Trust didn't come is a lie, not to animals, not to people. But sometimes, all it took was someone refusing to walk away. Martha brushed her fingers along the kitten's spine, whispering something too soft for Samir to hear. But Buzo heard it. And for the first time in weeks he closed his eyes and rested. The rain didn't stop that night. It fell in long, heavy sheets, filling the gutters and soaking the earth until the garden became a soggy quilt of ruined roots and broken stems. Samir sat in the dim light of the kitchen, nursing a cup of tea he hadn't asked for, his fingers tapping restlessly against the table. Martha was in the living room, humming under her breath an old lullaby from her childhood as she fed the kitten drops of warm milk through a syringe. Buzo sat nearby, close enough to watch, but far enough to give her space, his eyes never leaving the tiny bundle of fur wrapped in an old dish towel. Samir's patience frayed with each passing hour. You know this isn't going to work, right? He finally called out. It's sick, probably feral. You can't fix it just because you want to. Martha didn't answer at first. She looked down at the kitten, who was now sleeping fitfully in her lap, one paw twitching as if still running from something in a dream. Then she said quietly, "Not everything needs to be fixed, Samir. Some things just need to be held." He didn't respond, not with words, just stood up, placed the untouched tea in the sink, and went to bed without saying goodnight. Martha didn't follow. She stayed awake, listening to the soft, labored breathing of the kitten, stroking its fragile side as if she could press life back into it with nothing but warmth and will. Buzo eventually crept forward and lay beside her, his head near the towel, as if guarding something too delicate to name. By morning, the kitten's breathing had steadied, though it still didn't open its eyes. Martha fed it again, whispering encouragement with every drop. When Samir came downstairs, he paused at the threshold, watching them in silence. He didn't look angry, just tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying too many things without ever setting them down. He walked to the window, staring out at the garden, now little more than mud and stems. He used to wait for her there, he said suddenly, his voice low. Every afternoon, when school let out, Martha looked up startled. He knew the sound of her bus, knew the exact moment she'd come through that gate. Tail wagging before we even heard the engine. Samir's voice caught. After she was gone, he still waited, every day, for months. Martha swallowed the lump in her throat. I know. Samir turned, eyes rimmed red. I thought he'd forgotten, but he didn't. He just found someone else who needed waiting for. They didn't say her name, not yet. The pain was still raw, like a wound barely closed. But in that moment, something shifted between them, not forgiveness, but a shared breath, a crack of light in the wall they'd built around their grief. That afternoon, the kitten opened its eyes. Not fully just slivers of cloudy blue, but it was enough to make Martha laugh softly, relief blooming in her chest like the first flower after winter. Buzo perked up, tail thumping once. Then again, the kitten didn't cry this time. It looked around, confused but calm, and nestled closer to the warmth of Buzo's fur. He didn't move. He simply lay still, allowing the tiny creature to press against him like he understood exactly what it needed. Martha snapped a photo without thinking. It wasn't for social media. It wasn't for memory. It was proof that broken things could still reach for each other. That grief didn't have to hollow us out. It could teach us how to hold on differently. Later that evening, Samir brought down a shoebox filled with old towels and lined it with a pillow from their daughter's room. He didn't say anything, just placed it gently near the fireplace and nodded at Martha. She smiled, not with her lips, but with something softer, something that had been buried for months. They named the kitten Mira, after their daughter's favorite storybook character, the one who always found her way home, no matter how lost she became. And for the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel so quiet. It didn't feel like a museum of sorrow or a room built around absence. It felt like something was starting again, not loudly, not all at once, but gently. With one dog, one kitten. And the memory of a girl who had taught them both how to wait for love to return. It had been 9 days since Buzo had brought the kitten home, and Mira, tiny, frail, but somehow fierce, was still alive. Martha woke each morning, half afraid she'd find stillness where there had once been struggle, but instead, the kitten met her with a soft squeak, a flickering tail, and a stubborn will to be held. Her eyes had cleared, sharp now and impossibly curious, following every movement with the fragile focus of something that had already fought too hard to give up. Buzo remained her shadow. If she cried, he came. If she slept, he curled around her, not as a pet, but as something older, a guardian, a witness, a bridge. Samir had stopped protesting. He even reached into the shoebox one evening, gently stroking Mira's head with a finger, only to pull away quickly as if the contact burned. Martha watched him from the kitchen, noticing the flicker of something behind his eyes, something raw and unfinished. He was trying, and she knew what that cost him. The storm that had brought Mira hadn't returned, but the skies remained uncertain. Thick gray clouds moved like restless thoughts above the trees, and the air smelled like it couldn't make up its mind. That afternoon, Buzo disappeared again. Martha hadn't seen him leave, but when she noticed the back door slightly ajar, and the cushion by the fireplace empty, her stomach tightened with unease. He hadn't wandered off in days, not since Mira's condition had improved. But now, he was gone, silent and sudden. She searched the garden first, then the trees behind the shed, then along the narrow walking path that led to the edge of the forest. Nothing, no paw prints in the soft soil, no movement in the underbrush, only the sound of wind rustling through dry leaves and the distant caw of a crow overhead. When she returned to the house, Samir stood at the back door, his expression unreadable. He's not in the field either. Panic prickled under her skin. Something's wrong. Samir exhaled sharply. He'll come back. He always does, but this time felt different. This time it felt like he'd gone somewhere, not wandered. That night was restless. Mira cried out more than usual, pacing in tiny circles inside her box. Martha held her for hours, but nothing soothed her. At one point, Mira paused, stared toward the back window, and hissed softly at the dark. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was a warning. When the knock came, it was past midnight. Not loud, not frantic. Just a single, deliberate tap on the front door. Samir shot upright. Martha froze mid-step. No one ever came out here this late. She moved to the door slowly, barefoot and cautious, her hand hovering near the knob. She hesitated, heart pounding, then opened it. Buzo was on the porch, but he wasn't alone, and his mouth held just as gently as he had carried Mira. Was another kitten, slightly older, eyes wide, mewling in broken, panicked bursts. Martha dropped to her knees, her breath catching. The new kitten was injured, its hind leg dragged limp behind it, and there was a fresh gash along its side. It was soaked and shivering, but very much alive. Samir appeared behind her, staring in disbelief. Where did he help? Martha didn't answer. She took the kitten into her hands as Buzo lay down beside her, chest heaving, exhausted but steady. His fur was matted with thorns and flecks of dried blood. He'd fought something to bring this one home, and he had come back slower this time, not just tired but changed. Did he go looking for it? Samir asked, the words barely audible. Martha looked up at him, eyes wide. No, I think it called him. They wrapped the kitten in a warm towel, cleaned the wound, and placed it beside Mira. She didn't hiss this time. She licked the newcomer once, then curled beside it without hesitation, as if some invisible tether had been pulled between them. Samir stood in the corner for a long time, staring. Then he whispered, "Why does this feel like something she would have done?" Martha looked at him, tears brimming. Because it is. They didn't say her name, but they felt her in every corner of the house. In the way Buzo waited, in the way Mira had shared warmth without protest, in the way the silence that once hollowed their home now carried something soft. By morning, the storm clouds were gone. Buzo slept with both kittens tucked between his paws, and for the first time since they had lost their daughter, Samir reached for Martha's hand without looking away. not to explain, not to promise, just to say, I'm still here. And in that quiet, something finally began to heal. The morning after Buzo returned with the second kitten, the house felt different, not louder, not busier, but fuller. The kind of full that comes when silence is no longer empty. The kittens, now nestled together in a box by the fireplace, slept like they'd known each other forever, their tiny bodies curved into each other like matching puzzle pieces. Mira had stopped crying at night, and the new one whom Martha had started calling Nura no longer flinched when touched. The wound on his side was healing slowly, and though he still limped, he'd begun to follow Buzo with a cautious sort of trust. Martha watched all of it from the couch, her fingers wrapped around a warm mug of tea she hadn't taken a sip of in 10 minutes. Her gaze shifted between the kittens, the dog, and the half-open window, letting in the smell of damp leaves and the sound of birdsong. The world outside was waking up again. So, it seemed, was their home. Samir was standing at the far end of the living room, shoulders tense, eyes focused on Nuri. He hadn't said much since that night, the night Buzo had come home changed, but Martha saw it, in the way he paused longer when petting Mira, in how his hand rested on Buzo's head just a little longer than necessary. He was beginning to let something inside him move again, like a door slowly creaking open. Did he always know? Samir asked suddenly, voice low. Martha looked up. Know what? That they were out there, that they needed him. Martha didn't answer right away. She looked toward Buzo, who was now lying with his head gently resting between the kittens, breathing slow and calm. Maybe it wasn't knowing, maybe it was remembering. Samir's brows furrowed. Remembering what it means to protect something smaller than you, what it feels like to be needed again, what she taught him. Samir didn't look at her, but she saw the way his throat tightened, the way he blinked too quickly. He walked toward the fireplace and crouched down. For a long moment he just sat there, watching the two kittens rise and fall with each tiny breath. Then Nuri stirred, opened one eye and crawled forward, pressing his small head into Samir's hand. That was the moment Martha saw it, the shift. Samir didn't pull away, he stayed. Later that afternoon, as she watered the few plants that had survived the storm, Martha saw Buzo wander into the yard and stop at the base of the old swing set, the same swing their daughter had played on every evening, her laughter echoing across the field. He sat there quietly, tail curled around his side, head tilted slightly toward the sky. Martha stood still, the watering can forgotten in her hand. There was something about his stillness that made her throat ache. She walked over slowly and sat beside him in the grass. He didn't move, just leaned his weight against her side. She ran her fingers through his fur, and for the first time in months, she let herself say her daughter's name out loud. I miss her, she whispered. But I think you carried something for us when we couldn't. The wind blew gently, rustling the trees. When they returned to the house, Samir had taken the old baby gate from the basement and set it up near the hearth to give the kitten space. He had laid down soft blankets and an old fleece shirt she used to wear when she was little, the one with faded cartoon stars. Mira and Nuri had curled up on top of it, fast asleep. Buzo lay on the other side of the gate, eyes half closed, ears flicking with every small movement. That evening, as they ate dinner at the table for the first time in weeks, Samir finally said her name to her. He said it softly, in the middle of a story about the time she'd tried to dress Buzo in one of her tutus, and he had paraded around the yard like royalty. Martha laughed, the sound catching in her chest. But it came out and it stayed. The memory didn't shatter them, it warmed them, and that night, the house did not feel haunted. It felt like something sacred had been returned, not by time, not by forgetting, but by a dog who remembered where love had last been placed and carried it gently, one trembling heartbeat at a time, back to where it belonged. The first warm day of spring arrived without announcement. It snuck in gently, no thunder, no wind, just a soft breeze through the open windows and sunlight warming the corners of the house that had long stayed in shadow. The garden, once torn by storms and neglect, had begun to sprout again, timid little greens pushing through soil that hadn't seen care in months. Samir had started planting things again, without saying it out loud. Just small acts, a spade left by the hose, his sleeves rolled up, soil under his nails. He didn't talk about why. He just moved differently now, like someone who had remembered how to reach forward. Inside, Mira and Nuri were thriving. The limp in Nuri's leg had faded to a slight hop, something barely noticeable unless you were watching for it. They played, often leaping across furniture, knocking over cups of water, curling together like puzzle pieces in forgotten laundry baskets. Buzo watched them with a calm pride, eyes half closed, tail sweeping gently across the floor like a steady metronome. He didn't hover anymore. He had passed something on, and he knew it. One afternoon, Martha found herself sitting on the back steps, tea forgotten beside her, listening to the sound of paws across hardwood and distant laughter from a neighbor's yard. It had been months since she'd let herself stop and simply feel the stillness. Grief, she realized, didn't always scream. Sometimes it just took up space, like fog, dense and quiet, until something inside you gently reminded you how to breathe. She thought of her daughter every day. Not always in the heavy, sharp way she used to. Not just in photos or old-school drawings, but in Mira's determined eyes, in Nuri's cautious trust, in the way Buzo sat patiently under the swing set. Each evening, his ears tilted like he was listening for something far away. Grief hadn't left them. It had just softened into something that let in the light. Samir joined her without a word. He handed her a folded scrap of paper, creased and yellowed with age. She opened it and felt her chest tighten. It was one of her daughter's old drawings. A dog, 2 cats, and a house with a heart drawn above it. Underneath, in uneven handwriting, "I hope all the lost ones find home again." Martha didn't speak. She just pressed the paper to her chest and leaned into him. He wrapped an arm around her, and together they sat in the golden hour, not looking backward, not afraid of what would come next. That night, before bed, Martha found Buzo in the hallway, lying beside the kittens who had fallen asleep in a patch of moonlight. She knelt beside him, scratched behind his ear, and whispered, "Thank you." He opened one eye, thumped his tail once, and closed it again. It wasn't a story with a grand ending. No miracles. No headline-worthy twist. Just a quiet return to something they thought they had lost: the ability to feel joy without guilt, to say her name without breaking, to love something small again without fearing the cost. They didn't fill the hole she left. They never could, but in their own quiet ways. The dog, the kittens, and the 2 grieving hearts had built something new around it, a home that didn't try to forget, but dared to keep remembering, and in that remembering, they healed. Not completely, but enough.